The following podcast was produced in-house for KQEK.com. Back in 1973, veteran TV and occasional feature film director Ted Post helmed a film based on a script by playwright Abe Polsky, whose prior work included the occasional TV episode and feature film script. Within his Spartan filmography, Polsky's other feature film credits include The Gay Deceivers from 1969, The Rebel Rousers from 1970, and Brute Corps from 1971. But it is The Baby for which Polsky will forever be remembered, one of the most bizarre black comedies ever conceived. Originally tough to see, but eventually released on DVD and more recently on Blu-ray from Severin Films, The Baby tells the story of a social worker assigned to check in on a most unusual case, a grown man living in a crib with the emotional and intellectual capacity of an infant. Known only as Baby, the man-infant is managed by a powerful matriarch and two abusive sisters, each of whom become increasingly jealous and defensive when social worker and Gentry begins to take a more personal interest in Baby's potential growth and development. The eccentric plot, bizarre characters, twist ending, and classic political incorrectness of Post's film, not to mention some of the ugliest 70s hairstyle and clothes ever committed to film, motivated writer-director Dan Spurgeon to adapt Polsky's outstanding script into a play with a little more camp gusto, attitude, and grindhouse qualities. Spurgeon's bawdy play, which remains very faithful to the characters and Polsky's plotting, debuted in Los Angeles in 2013 with actor Frank Blocker playing the venomous matriarch Mama. Currently running at Toronto Storefront Theatre until November 1st, The Baby retains several of its core talent, and in this month's podcast, I spoke with writer-director Dan Spurgeon and star Frank Blocker about the impressionable film, the play's genesis and creation, Blocker's clever interpretation of Mama, bad 70s music, and slight differences between LA and Toronto audiences.
In terms of, I guess, how the play began, how did you first come across this film and its first impressions on each of you?
Well, the first time I saw it was, I think I was 10. And it was on a UHF channel in Oklahoma, and my parents kind of shut it off when they saw what I was watching. But it just, it struck me as weirdness then. I was able to find it at a video store. Later, when I was a teenager, saw it again. It was kind of hard to find around the States for a while. Showed up on Netflix a few years ago, and I watched it again, and that's really when it struck me as there's something stagey about this, and another director friend agreed, and we decided to try a little experiment with it.
And for me, the first time I saw it, Dan showed me the script and said, I don't know. I don't know if this will work. What do you think? And I vaguely had visions of the movie. I believe I must have seen it when I was, probably 10, 11, 12 years old on late-night TV when I wasn't supposed to be up that late. But as soon as I read it, I said, yeah, this is going to work. This works. It's just twisted enough to work.
I had first seen the film, I think, a couple of months ago because it got a Blu-ray release. I'd never actually heard of it before, but I knew the director because he had done a lot of television and the occasional feature film.
Yes.
And there's a lengthy interview on the Severin Blu-ray where he actually says that friends called him up and said, "Why did you make this? What were you thinking?" And when you watch the film, you kind of think, this could potentially have been an absolute career killer because it's so strange.
Yeah.
Well, so much of it still rings true, and the reflection back on the 70s is, in the midst of all this insanity, is pretty creepy too, because, just the reference of the welfare mother from the very beginning. There's the automatic assumption, even in 70s terms, that somebody's working the system. And we face that a lot in the States with people, not understanding that systems are in place to actually help people, and there's still the instant prejudices going on that really haven't changed over time. So there's that creepiness to it too.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an unusual script, and I think you were saying that the writer actually had his roots in theater.
Yes, he did. That was actually how we were able to find him to acquire the rights for the show. We contacted Samuel French because they had one of his plays published. Something that ran on Broadway, I believe it was about the Donner Party or something. So he's always kind of worked in weird stuff, I think. But it was only through them. He doesn't do email. He doesn't answer his phone. We had to contact him through snail mail.
And then what was his initial response when you were approaching him about making it into a play? And at what point did you have to sort of, I guess, clarify the type of play that you're going to make?
Actually, he was very, very quick and down to earth. We wrote him a letter. He called my producer. We were actually out shopping. My producer stepped outside, came back in 5 minutes later, and said, "We have the rights." Apparently, the conversation. He said, "You want to make a stage play out of the baby? Drew said, "You hold the stage rights for this screenplay." He said, "Yes, I do." He said, "We want to make a play out of it." Mr. Polsky said, "What's in it for me?" Drew said, "X percentage of box office." He said, "Done." So it was actually quite easy.
When it came time to actually do the adaptation, I mean, what I like so much about the play is that it really is a great encapsulation of the play. Like, what struck me as well is there's a lot of scenes in this play.
Yeah.
And that must have been very difficult to coordinate.
Well, it was really coming up with the whole set idea was sort of what crossed the line into, okay, I can do this, because being concerned about, how are we going to have all these small scenes and change them out without dragging, momentum down. Coming up with the idea of moving the panels and keeping everything really minimal that way was really kind of the turning point that said, okay, I know how to put this up.
I think also the movement that happens during the scene changes with the lighting itself. I think that also sort of gives sort of quiet momentum to the play. So you're always the play really has great pacing.
Oh, great! Yeah, it seems to. I mean, people seem to like it. I don't know. I'm always surprised at all that myself.
Oh, Dan was really excited when he had worked with Olivia Marshman on that stuff and met with her. He was quite giddy after that. It was like, this is what I've always wanted for these changes. So. Yeah, and it's really beautiful to watch from backstage as well.
Yeah, and that was all sort of my ideas on that were all sort of based on the folding and unfolding and moving sets you would see in, game shows and variety shows of the early 70s.
The music that you picked also was very appropriate for that. The stuff that also is at the beginning of, or the sort of the pre-show music, as well as the incidental music that happens during the course of the play, and then also during the scene changes.
Yeah, that was my friend Neil Boyette, who consulted me and actually helped me find a bunch of music for this. Was he sort of turned me on to this genre when we lived in San Francisco. This sort of loungecore 70s mod stuff. Finding the pre-show stuff, which is all Ray Conniff singers, was sort of a happy accident where I was just looking for pre-show music, stumbled across one, and said, "This should all be Ray Conniff singers. This is all just so ill-advised."
There's a version of 2001 that's just horrific.
Oh yeah. They also do a version of "You're Having My Baby" that actually in the first show, the first production in L.A., the cast after a couple shows said, "You have to stop playing that. We can't take it."
But I don't think 2001 is horrifying at all. It's quite motivating. It plays right before the show starts. We all get going.
It's actually, it's perfect.
Backstage.
It really is perfect because it does sort of set up everything. It has a nice build-up, and it's also kind of funky, but it's stunning how they decided to do a vocal version of it.
Oh, they also do a vocal version of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly somewhere. So there's a lot of ill-advised choices from that vocal group.
For the performances in the film, I mean, I'm interested to know, especially from Frank. I've always thought Ruth Roman was an interesting actress. She's very sort of classical Hollywood. And when she appeared in this mid to late 70s film with terrible hair, very loud clothes, and playing kind of a Joan Crawford type of character, I wonder, how were you able to balance your interpretation of the character while kind of playing a little bit of an homage to Roman's version of it? Because it does have that grandiose style.
Well, what I decided, I had been out in L.A. For about a year or so at that point, and you can't help but get a little immersed in film and film culture. Being out there, everyone's into it. And when Dan was talking about this, I knew the instant, it could be very easy to just fling on a gown and go out there and be funny because you're in ridiculous clothing. But he needed a veneer on this thing that was not great acting. And I wasn't going to go out there and just be purposefully bad or something. You've got to find a way in. And I realized the best thing to take would be to take from Ruth Romaine and just say, all right, imagine another character playing this. Why don't I create a character playing this? And then just everything started to fall into place from there. Ruth, I felt like, was always meant to be a great Joan Crawford type, meant to be wonderful in those roles, but she's too damn tall. She's too broadish. She's never going to get those kind of roles because the man always has to be much bigger. And she's big. Or it certainly has that presence, and it can overwhelm. So I think that's why she got the limitations that she got. And I thought, well, how many other actresses out there from those days have suffered, the slings and arrows of not being the right type? So I created an alternate character that was, a late 50s, early 60s actress who has had an entire career for 40, 50 years based on the fact that she had large breasts mostly, but she's good, and she's trained and trained and trained and trained, and her roles have always been, he went that away. That's as much as she's ever gotten in film, but she's been dying for these moments. Her agent throws her into a job where she's in a small theater in L.A. with a lot of actors of varying talents and skills. And I thought, well, that character would come in here and feel like she should be the best that she can be. She's going to show them all that no matter what size the theater, no matter what the role is, you give it your all, you rely on all your training. And this character sort of took over for me, and quite frankly, when I see some of the clips and interviews out of it, I'm watching it and I'm wondering who the hell that person is, because it ain't me. But yeah, it allowed for that veneer, and it allowed me to borrow from every actress I could. I try to squeeze in line readings like Barbara, subtly, not trying to do absolute impersonations, but do line readings in the way Joan Crawford might deliver a line. Barbara Stanwyck, Betty Davis is most certainly the one I'm referencing when I say, just when I needed him most, that grunty sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And so it allows me the opportunity to borrow from everybody, because this actress has worked with all of them, watched them all do the roles that she wished she had. So it gave me a chance to be sort of bursting at the seams as well. So it all seemed to work out.
Frank really changed the concept, getting him in the show, because originally, conceptually, the character, I was thinking more in terms of a divine, that sort of, referencing that camp aspect, which is such a huge influence on me. That divine Harvey Fierstein sort of thing, that obvious man in women's clothing, but very big and burly and gruff. And Frank really changed that, and I loved what he brought to the character, because it really made me see it in a completely different way.
Well, the casting is really first-rate, because you drew from a lot of really skilled actors, and
aren't they wonderful?
They're outstanding.
They're fantastic.
They don't necessarily bear always strong resemblances to the film characters, but I mean, for example, Claire Burns as Anne. I mean, she really does a great translation of Anjanette Comer's portrayal of it as well.
Yeah, everybody's doing things differently in the oddest way, usually in a theatrical piece. Within the framework they're doing it, because they all are sort of taking on that same aspect that I described of possibly another actor. How would another actor of the time period have approached this role? I know that Nick takes it on as he's the Mr. Foley right out the bat, and he has this portrayal of it of he's finally got a speaking role in a movie, so he's going to make everything count for his future reel,
Well, that was even
plays.
That was even the direction that was given to the guy who just plays a party guest. That was, this is the most. You have one line, two lines. They are the most important lines in the entire show, and play it that way.
And he does. I mean, even Daniel Cristofori has two lines and pops up in the end, and he's brilliant. It's like obviously going to see a lot more of him doing a lot of great things.
Yeah.
For the physical performances, I wonder how you were able to shape the physical performances and temper them, because there's a lot of physical gyrating and thrusting and posing that happens, and it just adds to the camp value, but it also is part of the characters, because even in the film, the characters are really eccentric.
Yeah, that was, the physicalities really was taken from just a directorial standpoint of it's very precise. It's very deliberate. Everything is deliberate, vocally and physically. There's a lot of, the idea of hitting your mark in there. I've seen a lot of film actors on stage, and they take strange postures, and there's very much acting from, hitting your mark and then acting from the shoulders up kind of thing happening. So, playing with those ideas, playing with just the deliberateness of everything.
Models as actors, too,
yeah.
That sort of thing, certainly.
And then the actor that plays Baby, Jeff Dinkel, I think his is probably one of the toughest roles, just like in the film, because he has, I think, pretty much one word that he actually speaks, but the rest is all just physical. But he kind of has to keep reminding the audience that he is the central character. He's the one that's been wounded. And I think from him, that's sort of where you get the film's sort of darkest undercurrent, which is that it's a really horrific story of child abuse.
Oh, Todd, it's actually based on a true story from what I can tell. So Jeannie the feral child seems to be the inspiration for this. But he's really, it's, and the guy who played it first, too, they're able to just be in it and be in it the whole time. It's tough on the actor, but when you get an actor who can pull it off, it's amazing.
And Baby's an excellent reminder to the audience too that we are all up there. He really does reference us all with the earnestness. It's got to be played for the absolute serious, dramatic, horrible conclusions that come about, and with utter sincerity. And he's a great reminder of that with that performance he gives. So.
Without spoiling a particular scene in the play, there's a moment when Alba punishes Baby, and in the film, as well as in the play, it's kind of the moment where you kind of think, well, wait a second, I've been laughing for the last 40 minutes, but this is really serious. This is incredibly dark. And in the film, because the director picks these weird point of view shots, and very wide angles, it really is unsettling. And I'm sure that for some viewers, it's kind of the point when they were watching the film, whether they wanted to continue, because it's such a dark moment.
Yeah. I don't, the thing is, I remember, I have some really sick sense of humor when it comes to that kind of thing. I remember laughing a lot at that part in the film, which probably makes me sound like a horrible person. But it was really just it was just so over the top at that point. Mm-hmm. It's not, they talk about locking him in closets and things like that, but what you see happening is some of the most over-the-top kinds of punishments I've ever heard of.
There's a moment when Mama has a song.
Yes.
And what I like, I guess the first question is, how did that idea come about?
Talk to the director.
It was just I'm not quite sure how that idea came about, actually. I was just trying to, play with the idea, just getting more ridiculous.
And sort of 70s reference.
Yeah.
Another crazy 70s reference, I remember that.
Yeah, where you would have these songs and, almost pre-music videos that would come out in the middle of these films.
Yeah, I think it's been replaced these days by what's just, there's a constant, every movie has their video montage, passage of time. And I think it was born of that, of those moments in older films where just all of a sudden, I still remember Everybody's Talking from Nashville and thinking, wow, this really kind of breaks, even though the movie is a musical in a sense, and it is about performers and singers, and it's still the way that one, sorry, Everybody's Talking, I'm getting confused on my songs here. But there's several films I can think of from that time period where I would be sitting there watching them going, where did this freaking song come from? Yeah. And it's certainly one of those moments.
I think what the song also does, though, is it does sort of remind the audience that this is a mother who essentially has had her child stolen from her, and no matter how horrific she is, it's still her child, and it was done without any consent, any kind of legal police intervention. So you do have sympathy for her at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. Part of the choice was actually pushing it a little more towards the musical, because we have all this music happening. The more I saw it played in L.A., the more I was like, this really is sort of verging on musical. Pushing it a little further into that, giving that outlet to emotion. which I thought was more, just added something more than simply starting a scene with her crying at the crib. They always say that in musicals you sing because you can't speak what you're feeling, and I think it's sort of pushing it that way.
Another thing that you include in your adaptation of the play is, I believe, you play up Anne's hypocrisy as well. I think it's more overt in the play than in the film, where it's very clear, at least earlier, I think, in the play, she's clearly working the system to her advantage. We're just not really sure why.
And quite judgmental.
Yeah,
quite judgmental.
In the film, it's kind of a peculiar finale, the way that all the characters converge, and then when you finally get the sort of the twist, to me, certainly the last shot, it just clinches that the whole film is a really, really dark black comedy.
Oh, very dark, and nobody is a good guy, and that's what I really like. The people you think are villains are probably not as bad as the people that the people that you've been sort of rooting for, that seem like their hearts and minds are in the right place.
Well, it seemed to stamp the time period too. I remember going back and watching the movie after Dan says, "Well, we're gonna do this sucker," and I went back and watched it and thought that at the end, I thought, well, the message seems to be that innocence will never again survive in this world. That's the message.
Pretty good.
Innocence is gone. We're all doomed. I thought, wow. And yet you're still sitting there going, I wouldn't be like those people, I wouldn't be like those people. And as Anne says, we'll never be like them,
Mm-hmm.
And that's always the assumption when we are judgmental toward people. I think one of the reasons we're always judgmental is because we know we're one step away from it.
Mm-hmm.
We just have our masks on firmly.
Two final questions. I just wanted to know if you found if there were any differences between the LA and Toronto audiences in terms of their response to the campy elements in the play.
I've only noticed one. And Mama's gruffness is taken a little bit, just certain lines that were, are the more gruffer lines, the more yelling type of, out-and-out yelling. I mean, I'm certainly using every ounce of Shakespearean training I have to sound loud and all, but those lines where they're particularly gruffer, I've noticed. I thought, I guess Canadians don't like people yelling at them.
The realistic anger they don't seem to respond to as well as in LA.
Yep, but they seem to be more politically incorrect accepting.
Yes.
I can tell you when the first time the word retarded comes up and is referenced, in LA, it almost seemed a race between the audience as to who could be offended the first to let everybody know they were the most liberal in the room.
I completely forgot how often that word actually appears in the film, so when I saw it again in the play, I thought, oh, yeah, that's right. It's really a 70s film.
Yeah. Well, at the time, it was a compliment. I mean, It was the nice way to say an imbecile, because imbecile used to be the nice way to say crazy.
It was the medical term, that is no longer used.
And then just the last question is there a chance the play might be taped and made available for a video release?
That would probably be a different set of rights with Mr. Polsky, so I don't know about the possibility of that, but we're certainly looking at, possibilities of taking it further, which might, help along that sort of thing.
The Baby runs at the Storefront Theatre in Toronto until November 1st. For more information on showtimes, please consult www.thebabyliveonstage.com. Special thanks to Dan Spurgeon and Frank Blocker for their generous time, producer Drew Blakeman for facilitating the interviews, and Glenda Fordham at Fordham PR for coordinating press materials. The film version of The Baby, reviewed at KQEK.com, is available from Severin Films on DVD and Blu-ray. Coming next, an extensive interview with composer Terence P. Minogue on scoring Roar, the 1981 cult film starring Tippi Hedren and Melanie Griffith, recently restored and released in theaters. Roar will make its Blu-ray premiere November 3rd via Olive Films and Drafthouse Films, but a very exhaustive film review plus some rare publicity materials are available at KQEK.com. If you like this podcast, please visit KQEK.com's Facebook page and follow our Twitter feed at mondomark_KQEK. All podcasts are available via Libsyn, iTunes, and YouTube. The editorial skills responsible for this podcast are also available for hire. If you require audio editing, mixing, and cleaning up interview recordings prior to publication, Please visit mondomark.com for more info and to hear demo reels. Until next time, this is Mark R. Hasan, editor of KQEK.com. This podcast is copyrighted 2015 by Mark R. Hasan.